I've always been fascinated by the story of the Polgar family. So Laszlo Polgar, he was a Hungarian educational psychologist. And he had this theory that geniuses are made, not born. And he wanted to test his theory out on his own children. So he asked his wife, would it be okay if we could try some of my techniques with our children? And she said, sure, let's give it a shot. So they have their first daughter, Susan, in 1969. And at 4 years old, she's rummaging through one of the old cabinets and she finds a chess set, one of Laszlo's old chess sets. And she takes it out and starts playing with the pieces. And Clara, she didn't know how to play chess, but she told Susan, when your father gets home, I'll have him teach you. So he walks to the door, she tells Laszlo the story, and he thinks, oh my gosh, this is the perfect activity for our proto-genius. Chess, it's an art, it's a science, and very much like competitive athletics, it yields measurable results over time. He sits down and he teaches her the game and he decides, you know what, I want to test Susan's mettle. I want to see how good she is at this game. So they travel down to this smoke-filled chess club in the heart of Budapest. Walks in and announces to everyone that he would like someone to take on his daughter in a game of chess. And they thought this was hilarious. They couldn't stop laughing about it. And eventually one of them said, sure, I'll take her on. And so they play a game of chess, and within 4 minutes, he has been bested by this little girl. I mean, absolutely crushed, and he can't believe it. And she literally reaches out her hand across the chess table to shake his hand because that's what Laszlo had taught her to do as a sign of respect. He couldn't believe that he had been bested by a 4-year-old. And Laszlo, who was really impressed with the results, decided, okay, well, what I want to do is I want to see kind of how good she is, and entered her into 11 and under citywide girls tournament. And she won with a perfect score. Eventually, they ended up with 2 more daughters. The middle child, Sophia, the youngest child was Judith. Both of them followed in their sister's footsteps and became avid chess players. In 1985, they travel to New York City for a chess tournament. And all the girls, they drew a lot of attention. But the one who garnered the most gawkers was 9-year-old Judith, who took on 5 opponents at the exact same time and beat them all blindfolded. At the age of 21, in 1991, Susan became the first female player ever to be given the designation of Grand Master. The title of Grand Master is given by the International Chess Federation to all of the top players in the world. And her sister Judith would soon follow that same year at the age of 15. A Grandmaster has anywhere from 20,000 to 100,000 configurations of the board memorized. With a mere glance at the board, they are able to determine what they think the outcome of a particular set of plays will be. Now, Judith, who is considered to be the greatest female chess player of all time, she has said that the more permutations of the board you have memorized, the more you can anticipate your opponent's moves, the more control you have over the board, the more likely you are to win, which is, of course, how she was able to win at 9 years old when she was blindfolded. But she also talked about how when she was playing in these really difficult tournaments against high-ranked players, very often she would say that anxiety could creep into your mind at these tense moments. And when anxiety creeps in, that's when you start to lose control. And you forget your moves, and very quickly, you've lost. So control and anxiety are really 2 opposing forces in our lives. When we feel in control, what that means is we can anticipate what's going to happen, and so our anxiety tends to be quite low. But the less control you have, the more you're going to worry. Wouldn't it be nice if we could all just be grandmasters of life? If life was like a chessboard where we could just memorize and anticipate all the moves. Unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. Life doesn't give us that level of control. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about anxiety. Where does it come from? How does it manifest in our lives? And how can we gain a level of control that allows us to manage our anxiety? That's dessert. Will you join me in the kitchen? When you think about it, anxiety is really when we're unsure of what's going to happen in the future. And everybody feels anxiety on some level or another. Some feel it very intensely, others not as much. The thing is though, we all worry about different things. One person's major anxiety is another person's minor concern. And I think one of the best ways to categorize our anxiety is actually from a psychologist in the 1940s named Abraham Maslow, who created a psychological theory known as Maslow's hierarchy of need. You're probably familiar with it. You've probably heard it before. It's usually represented as a pyramid, which is what I have here. I tried to make a cake with the different colors that are representing it up and down. I am not the best baker. I did the best job I could with it, but generally, when you look at it, you'll see that they represent it with these colors, and there's 5 different levels. And the way it works is that in order to move up the pyramid, which is your goal, you need to satisfy the level down low. So the first level is survival. It's what we all have to do to get by. So that comprises air, food, water, shelter, clothing. We all need this if we're going to make it through life. And until you have that, that is your primary worry. You're not going to think about anything else. But once you have those things, this leads to the second level of the pyramid, which is called safety. And safety is defined by things like personal security, financial security, health and well-being, and having a safety net against disasters. Now, this can mean different things to different people for sure. But generally speaking, you know that you've achieved this level when you're not worried about falling back down to the first level. Now, once you have your basic needs and safety met, you can move to the third level of the pyramid, which is love and belonging. And this is where we find things like friendship, intimacy, and family. Now, the truth is, you can have friendship, intimacy, and family at the lower 2 levels. It's just that it can be really hard to focus on those things when you don't have your basic needs met or you're always worried about safety. But when you have those 2 things, well, you can nurture them. And once you've spent time working on love and belonging, that allows you to move to the next level of the pyramid, which Maslow calls esteem. Now, esteem, he really breaks that into 2 levels. So there's a lower level of esteem and a higher level of esteem. The lower level of esteem is when you're trying to garner respect from other people. You really want people to see you, and that's where you get your worth and value. And then there's the higher level of esteem where you're really working on the competencies of self-confidence and independence and freedom. You don't need anybody else to tell you that you're a good person. And then once you have those 4 levels, you can then move to the final level, which is self-actualization. This is when you are working on trying to reach your highest potential as a human being. So because you've now mastered all the previous levels, you can take your gifts and your skills and you can use them for the benefit of the world around you. Now, I'm sure you've tried to figure out exactly where you are on this scale. Everybody wants to peg themselves as high as possible. But what I think is fascinating about this is that for most of human history, human beings were at the bottom two levels. And this really impacted the way that our minds evolved. And so to explain to you what I mean, I want you to join me downstairs. But before I do, I want to take a little bite of this cake, tell you how it is. You can actually taste the self-actualization. Join me downstairs. If we could step inside of a time machine and go back 100,000 years, what we would find is that humans lived in small groups or bands of hunter-gatherers. Now these hunter-gatherers, they were nomadic. They followed their food sources, they lived off of the land, and they would find shelters by creating makeshift tents or natural shelters in caves or forests. And their lives, they were very hard. You could very easily get sick, get an infection, die. It was a hard life. Everything was a struggle for survival. And yet, at the same time, anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherers, these are humans who live today like our ancestors did 100,000 years ago, they have found that they have very low incidences of anxiety and depression compared to people who live in modern industrialized nations. One of the theories as to why these modern hunter-gatherers seem less susceptible to mental illness is because their lifestyle mirrors exactly how our brains evolved. So our brains evolved to live in nature and to struggle for survival. And that's what modern hunter-gatherers do. But today, our lives look nothing like that. I mean, our lives are relatively easy by comparison. If you want something to eat, do you have to go out and hunt for it and find it? No, you go to a grocery store. If you're thirsty, you don't have to go to a river. You turn on the tap. If you get sick, you go to a doctor and he'll heal you. If you're too hot or too cold, you literally change the thermostat. The intense level of comfort that we experience in developed countries is so great that we hardly ever even leave our homes. In fact, the world we live in today is something that our hunter-gatherer ancestors could hardly have imagined. But there is a downside to all of this luxury. There is a consequence to it. I don't think it's a coincidence that with the rise of creature comforts, we have also seen a significant rise in mental illness in industrialized nations. And I think the reason why this is happening is because our anxiety was really designed to help us survive. And now it's been displaced into other areas of our lives. So hunter-gatherers, they had really specific ways of living out their lives. Like they had a very specific purpose. They knew that they were going to go out and they had to contribute to making sure that everybody was going to make it. It was clear, make sure we have our next meal, don't die. But for us, because we can simply have our needs met very easily, well, our purpose gets a little bit more murky. And when it's murky, we tend to ask ourselves questions like, why am I here? What's the meaning of my life? And what everybody tells you is, well, you have to find your passion. You gotta do things that you're passionate about. But the problem is, passion doesn't often pay the bills. So you end up getting a job so that you can sustain yourself. But that job isn't necessarily your passion. In fact, there was a study done by Gallup in 2019 where they looked at people around the world, their job satisfaction. And what they found was 85% of people around the world hate their jobs. So what that tells you is most people, when they do their work, they're not doing something they're passionate about. They're just doing something that allows them to survive. And when you're doing something that you feel is meaningless, well, that has an impact because your life eventually feels meaningless. And this is when anxiety really manifests, because you feel out of control and then you start to worry. And it's weird because you look around and you say to yourself, oh my goodness, like, why do I feel so anxious? I have everything I need. And yet, for some reason, I am worried all the time. Well, the answer to that question is both very simple and very complex. Come with me and I'll explain to you what I mean. The paradox of modern life is that we believe that by removing barriers from our lives, that we are going to make our lives better. And don't get me wrong, I don't wish that I was living 100,000 years ago. I'm very happy to be alive today. But every time we remove obstacles and we make our lives easier, we actually end up increasing our anxiety. And so, very much like what Judith Polgar was talking about, when that anxiety starts to seep in, we feel out of control. And so one of the most important ways that we can gain control back in our lives is by gaining a deep sense of meaning and purpose. The problem is that we look for purpose in kind of all the wrong places. So I think that we think that by getting a lot of money, we can very easily move up Maslow's hierarchy because money does make life easier. And it's true. It's nice to have a lot of money. It's nice to be able to do the things that you want to do. But if that is your sole purpose in life, is to make money, in my opinion, that is very misguided. So from my perspective, what I think we need to do is we need to look at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of need, self-actualization. The idea behind that is that you're reaching your full potential as a human being. And in reaching that potential, what you're doing is you're taking your gifts and you're using them for the benefit of people all over the world. I think one could argue that the greatest purpose a person can have is when they know that their presence is changing the world for the better. And I think the place where we can do this best is with the people in our lives, our friends and our family. Because when you invest those gifts that you have, and we all have very special gifts that we can use, when you use those to improve the lives of the people around you, expecting nothing in return, what often happens is you are shown a great deal of love and appreciation, and that's so much better than any amount of money you could receive. And when you serve your community, it's kind of like what happens in the hunter-gatherer community. See, every single one of these people, they had a real purpose to their lives. They knew what they needed to do to be able to get by, and they depended on each other. They had a built-in sense of purpose in their life. And that built-in sense of purpose is something that we don't have any longer. So when you serve your community, when you're making those kind of investments, I think it's going to decrease your anxiety, it's going to increase your enjoyment of life, and ultimately I think you will find that by giving of yourself to your community, that sense of purpose is really going to enhance everything that you do. And so I hope that you will strive to find that deep sense of purpose in your life. I hope that you will get to a point where it allows you to feel like you're in control of your own destiny, and that through that control you feel as though you are making a difference in the world. So no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter how you feel, please know that you are loved, you are seen, and you are cared for, if by no one else, by me. My name is Alex Lang, and until next time.